India and Europe had a very long history of trading relations via the Silk Road, but the rise of the Ottoman Empire led it to being dominated by Arab merchants and traders, who acted as intermediaries between Asia and Europe. European merchants felt oppressed by the high taxes and incredibly long distances fraught with dangerous obstacles. They increasingly desired to establish direct trade routes to Asia, which had the potential to generate immense profits, particularly in the trade of spices, more precious than gold. In the 15th century, Europe achieved great advancements in the art of navigation and shipbuilding. Thereafter, Europeans began enthusiastic preparations for adventurous and long sea voyages to Asia and to other unknown parts of the globe. Accounts by adventurers of the likes of Marco Polo told of vast wealth and opulence in India far exceeding that which was known in Europe, igniting passion in the well-fortified explorers. The Portuguese were first to arrive in India in 1498. They eagerly set about rivaling the Muslims in controlling important ports. They eventually gained a monopoly over the Indian Ocean trade, and any private trader caught with a cargo of spices was arrested. Muslim traders fared the worst, often being executed, perhaps as revenge for their earlier domination. It took much longer for England to reach India, having a slower start in developing its own navy. The formidableness of the English navy first shined in 1588 upon the destruction of the Spanish Armada, when the Spaniards attempted to invade England, but were pummeled, mostly by severe weather, dashing the Spaniards' hopes of converting the Protestants there into Catholics. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to the presently known British East India Company, giving it exclusive trading rights with the East Indies, particularly in India, for spices, cotton, silk and tea. As a joint stock company, it was composed of English investors and merchants who helped share the risks of potential failures. The company's first expedition to India was led by William Hawkins, who landed at Surat in 1608. Having managed to dress himself as an Afghan nobleman, he proceeded to the Mughal emperor's court at Agra, hoping to secure a trading agreement. This took time, as the Emperor Jehangir so greatly enjoyed the company of Hawkins that he detained him for 3 years before granting him approval to build a factory. While at court, Hawkins was provided a generous salary for his conversations and was also presented with a Christian wife. Unfortunately, Hawkins came back to England as a failure due to the license for the factory having been rescinded. The Portuguese heard about the developing relations with the English, and straightaway exerted their influence to stop the foolish chumminess. In 1612, Thomas Best set sail to Surat with a fleet of 4 ships. A squadron of 4 Portuguese galleons and 16 barks confronted them, and a 3-day battle ensued. 3 of the galleons became grounded, and 1 sunk, forcing the Portuguese to withdraw. The whole affair was witnessed by thousands of people from shore and so impressed the governor of Gujarat that he convinced the emperor that henceforth he should favor the English over the Portuguese. The Portuguese greatly resented the arrival of the English and feared their alliance with the Mughals. In 1613, the Portuguese decided to seize the Rahim, the largest vessel sailing on the Indian seas, which also happened to belong to the emperor's mother. Additionally, they arrested all pilgrims on board and confiscated about 300,000 sterling pounds worth of cargo. By holding Rahim to ransom, the Portuguese wished to discourage the Mughals from further contact and trade with the English. Quite unexpectedly, Jehangir actually became infuriated. He closed down traffic at the Surat port, seized the Portuguese settlement of Daman, closed Jesuit churches, and suspended all allowances to Portuguese priests in Mughal India. With this clean-up, the English became the primary foreign presence in the Mughal court. In 1615, King James I sent Thomas Roe to India as his ambassador with the hopes that Roe would be more successful than Hawkins in obtaining a trading license. Roe, being a courtier, member of parliament, Amazon explorer, ambassador to the Sublime Porte, and a self-described man of quality, came prepared with thoughtful gifts for the emperor. He presented hunting dogs, English mastiffs and Irish greyhounds, as well as an English state coach, Mannerist paintings, an English virginal, which is an instrument, and many crates of red wine. Jehangir's interest was piqued with the gifts, but faded upon Roe's commencement of discussion regarding preferential customs duties and trade. Jehangir preferred instead to discuss medicine, astronomy, animal husbandry, amongst other topics, most especially about what the distant land of England was like, what beer was, and if Roe could concoct it right there. He especially desired an English horse. Privately, Roe wrote critically of the Mughal rule, reporting, "Religion's infinite, laws none." Yet in the same reports, Roe added that he had entered a world of almost unimaginable splendor. It took Roe several months to finally accomplish his duty of obtaining the license to trade with and establish factories all across the Mughal Empire. Jehangir did not grant exclusive rights, but did allow the English to compete with the traditional traders. The English further tried to establish trading posts in Indonesia, with its lucrative spice markets, but found that the trade was dominated by the Dutch. After the Dutch massacred English merchants in 1623, the company decided it best to increasingly focus its attention on India. Mughal traders realized the potential for mutual benefit with English traders, and the British East India Company became a junior partner in the Mughal Empire's sophisticated commercial network. The English brought woolen goods, quicksilver, some manufactured goods, and silver, while in turn buying India's spices, indigo, silk and cotton textiles. Indian textiles including calico, gingham, and a variety of other fabrics were considered to be of the highest quality in the world with their fine textures and beautiful craftsmanship. They were especially popular in England for their exquisite floral designs, pleasing textures, and relative cheapness. English manufacturers simply could not compete. When further English requests for trading privileges were turned down, the English merchants became offended and decided to blockade ports. They then commenced to fight against the Mughal army from 1686 to 90. The Mughal emperor at the time, Aurangzeb, decisively defeated the English merchants. He did not think of them as a serious threat and was satisfied with an apology and their agreement to pay a fine. At the time, the emperor was more interested in countering the rising Maratha Empire, a predominantly Hindu warrior group. Aurangzeb proved to be the last effective Mughal emperor, under which the empire reached its greatest extent, encompassing most of India. Aurangzeb's reign was characterized by a period of rapid military expansion and a flourishing economy that surpassed the Qing-China dynasty as the world's largest economy and biggest manufacturing power. After Aurangzeb's death, the empire began to decline due to its sheer size, incompetent administration, noble infighting, and largely ineffective rulers. The unstable situation in the Mughal Empire was compounded with what had been Aurangzeb's religious intolerance. Unlike previous emperors that had practiced religious tolerance, Aurangzeb had strictly adhered to Islamic Sharia law, offending the feelings of Hindus, Sikhs, Jats, and multiple other religions. In 1724, the Muslim governor of Hyderabad in southern India rebelled and established a separate Shia state, where he reintroduced religious toleration. Hindu kingdoms also fought back, supported by the French and English. With the decline of Mughal authority, the British East India Company increasingly became involved in subcontinental politics in order to maintain and even expand trading privileges during the emergence of dynamic individual successor states. By the early 1700s, mainstay business for the company included cotton, silk, opium, indigo dye, saltpetre, for gunpowder, and tea. While the company had transported enslaved Africans since 1620, primarily from East Africa, including Mozambique and Madagascar, large-scale transportation increased dramatically from the 1730s to 1750s. They worked the large plantations. The British East India Company became one of London's most powerful financial institutions and an important bellwether of the British economy. It was unfortunate for the English that multiple other European states had also decided it beneficial to involve themselves inside India and compete with each other. Fierce competition with the Dutch led to sea battles that escalated into war between England and Netherlands 3 times in the 17th century. The British finally rose to a more comfortable position after the 1741 Battle of Callao. The Indian Kingdom of Travancore, led by King Marthandavarma, defeated the Dutch East India Company, effectively halting their colonial ambitions in India. That left the French as the main rival of the British, and Anglo-French tensions intensified. Initially, the British East India Company's forces consisted of small groups of factory guards, but as competition with France grew, these forces expanded. In the mid-18th century, the British East India Company received a charter to raise its own army to protect its assets and fortifications. Additionally, the Crown helped reinforce the company's army by dispatching regiments of the regular British Army. The company could also call on the British Navy, which had come to dominate the world seas by the 18th century. Many Indians joined the British Company Army as well for guaranteed, regular pay to fight kingdoms they had always fought. Sepoys, or Indian mercenary soldiers trained in European technique, constituted the majority of the army. Eventually the standing army would grow to 260,000 soldiers by the dawn of the 19th century, more than twice the membership of the British Army. The company also received financial support from some local Indian merchants and bankers who saw the British East India Company's increasing influence as an unmissable opportunity. The struggle for global supremacy between Great Britain and France culminated in the 7 Years' War, lasting from 1756 to 63. A key battle in India was that of Plassey in 1757 in Bengal. It started when the Nawab of Bengal demanded of the British that the fortifications being built against him be taken down. The British thought this rather much, leading to conflict that ended when Major General Robert Clive destroyed the Nawab of Bengal and his supporters, very easily. The battle lasted a few hours, and truly was won even before it had commenced. Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula's military commander, General Mir Jafar, turned out to be a traitor. While he had previously led the Nawab's army to victory against the British in Calcutta in 1756, he decided to betray the Nawab this time, upon learning that the British would support him as the new Nawab, if they were allowed to win. A greater number of soldiers were bribed as well to throw away their weapons, surrender prematurely, and even turn their arms against their own army, leaving few soldiers and the French to fight alone with Siraj-ud-Daula. The defeated Siraj-ud-Daula fled but was later captured and his body hacked to pieces. Jafar became the new ruler of Bengal, the richest part of India, and promised to support British interests. Consequently, the French were effectively kicked out of India, having lost their trading interests and influence. This exemplified the British legacy in India. Few victories were achieved without the use of bribes, and few promises made by the British were ever kept. To keep India's sheer population from overwhelming them, the British elected to fight individual kingdoms. Over 1,000 of them existed throughout multiple regions. At least 22 languages were spoken and multiple different religions practiced, and in all this variety, the princes rivaled each other. The British offered princes trading opportunities and protection from the others, while at the same time stoking tensions between the kingdoms. Many princes willingly gave trading rights and ports in exchange for support and European weapons. The British employed the doctrine of lapse and subsidiary alliance to take over most of India. The doctrine of lapse allowed the British to annex Indian princely states if the ruler died without a male heir, despite objections, particularly from the Hindus who believed others could be adopted into ruling families. The British adopted the practice because they stated that rulers were not doing enough to protect the people from external aggression and internal rebellion. In a state of subsidiary alliance, the British offered military protection in exchange for control of the state's foreign affairs. Consequently, rulers were required to keep the company's army at their capital, pay for the upkeep of the British army, disband their own armies, expel all other Europeans, and keep a British official, or residents, at the capital, who would oversee all negotiations and communications with other states. The British then used puppet states to attack nearby states. Some kings never fought and simply gave up their entire kingdoms out of fear. For stubborn, more resilient kingdoms, spies were sent to instigate rebellions from within. Whenever more than one claimant to the throne existed, the British played the prospects against each other, providing support and extracting promises to serve British interests. Princes signed complex treaties, allowing British excuses to attack erstwhile friends. The British were ruthless in breaking treaties and cancelling agreements, in the end betraying all of the kingdoms. India's large population and sophisticated social, political, and economic institutions made imperialistic ideas of empty land inapplicable in the subcontinent, so the British East India Company did not achieve the same level of control characterizing British settler communities, Canada, Australia, the United States, New Zealand, Cape and the Caribbean. India was a colony of exploitation rather than of settlement. Its value lay in controlling internal markets and international trade, appropriating peasant production, and above all, collecting tax revenue, which paid for the large standing army, company employees, civil servants, and provided the company with a very generous purse for all its endeavors. Taxes in some regions were 50%, and sometimes more. Once the company had assumed control of Bengal in 1757, it eliminated Indian tariffs, allowing British goods to flood the domestic market while creating a system of exorbitant taxes and internal duties that prevented Indians from selling cloth within their own country, let alone exporting it. Indians were forced to sell their raw goods at low prices, which the company bought, processed, and then sold in Europe and elsewhere at inflated prices. Indians were forced to buy these products themselves, not having other options. India effectively became deindustrialized, allowing England alone to grow into the premier textile manufacturer in the world. Profit generated from Indian resources and markets led to a drain of wealth as profits flowed only in one direction, to Britain. In today's money, it is safe to say that the system drained trillions of dollars from India. By the mid-1700s and early 1800s, the British East India Company came to account for half of the world's trade. It was the most powerful corporation in the world. Many Britons bought shares in the company and became very wealthy, even modest middle-class members benefited from share ownership. Bad weather in 1770 resulted in poor harvests in Bengal, which turned into a famine as what little reserves farmers had, needed to be sold in order to afford the high taxes. Some chose to simply flee their land. About 10 million died of starvation and illness. Company land revenues fell precipitously, forcing the company to appeal to the British Crown for an emergency loan of £1 million in 1772, which was granted. The company continued to expand, and by 1818, it directly controlled over two-thirds of the subcontinent's landmass, and indirectly controlled the rest. Sepoys in the company army began to feel somewhat disrespected and did not entirely appreciate the handling of various matters. The spark that began a major rebellion and a mass mutiny came in 1857, when a rumor spread about a new rifle the Sepoys would be receiving. To load the rifle, soldiers believed they would have to bite off the end of the cartridge, which was covered in pigs' and cows' grease. This was an insult to both Muslims and Hindus, as it is against the religious beliefs of Muslims to eat pig products and against the religious beliefs of Hindus to eat cow products. This simply confirmed the increasing belief that the British did not respect Indian values. In March of 1857, the soldier Mongol Pandey attacked British officers at the military garrison in Barakpur, starting the first of many rebellions that quickly spread across northern and central India, with civilians joining in on the fight. Both sides suffered much bloodshed and many thousands in casualties. Luckily for the British, reinforcements poured in from Britain, and the rebellion was eventually subdued. This was, however, some of the final history for the company. It would be dissolved shortly after. In 1858, control of India transferred from the company to the British Crown, better known as the British Raj. To ensure a stable environment, the British employed a divide-and-rule policy. The British leveraged existing social hierarchies to maintain control over the diverse Indian populations by relying on the leaders of different castes to maintain order and prevent large-scale rebellions. Hindus made up the greater majority of India's population and organized themselves into varying caste levels, which the British utilized effectively by aligning themselves with the highest caste, the Brahmins, and restoring some of their privileges that had been repealed by Muslim rulers before. The higher castes, receiving special attention and education to better serve in government positions, became reliant on the British while keeping the others in their designated roles. The Hindu religion was best understood by the British as consisting of four main castes, and in order of respect or purity, they were Brahmins, the priests, Kshatriyas, the warriors, Vaishyas, the business people, and the Sudras, common peasants and laborers. Not mentioned in Hindu scriptures but still very prevalent were also the untouchables, who could pollute those who associated with them. They likely killed and ate animals, dealt with dirty materials, and had ancestors who may have been menaces to ancient traders. Each caste was obliged to perform its designated job, which, if performed well, resulted in reincarnation into a higher caste in the next life. The ultimate goal was to escape reincarnation and enter heavenly paradise. The upper castes were very helpful in pointing out those who were below them, and just how far below they were. The British took careful note and proceeded to take census of the population with each civilian's exact positions in society, thereby codifying the system. It ensured that everybody remained at their status and would not have the option of escaping their situations by traversing to other regions. The Criminal Tribes Act of 1871 geographically redistributed and immobilized criminalized populations on the basis of family units. Entire tribal communities, around 200 of them, were labeled as hereditary criminals. These were nomadic and semi-nomadic people, and forest dwellers who didn't live according to Brahmanical norms. They became subject to constant surveillance and were required to regularly report to police stations. Criminalized tribes received punishment for any crimes committed in their vicinity and were said to be addicted to systematic commission of non-bailable offenses. Between 1835 to 1917, Britain went into poverty-stricken villages whose people had little opportunity, and from there took more than 1 million Indian indentured laborers to work in any of the many scores of British colonies, on plantations and railways. The people typically signed contracts for 5 years, but because they were illiterate, signed with a thumbprint without fully understanding the details. They usually ended up working for much longer and ended up remaining in the colonies as they could not afford the journey back home. Many of them were simply kidnapped from India. The number of famines only increased from the late 18th century into the 19th century and beyond. From 1881 to 1920, India suffered between 50 to 165 million excess deaths from starvation and illness. Life expectancy dropped from 26.7 years in the 1880s to 21.9 years in the 1910s. In 1902, Indian economist Ramesh C. Dutt estimated that the annual outflow of goods from India was sufficient to meet the nutritional requirements of 25 million people. Poverty increased from 23% in 1810 to more than 50% in the mid-20th century. India's GDP had historically fluctuated between 25% and 35% of the world's GDP ever since the 1st century until the 17th century, more than all of Europe combined. But by the time Britain left in 1947, it had dropped to 2%. Britain had drained India of around $45 trillion between 1765 and 1928. When World War II started in Europe, India served as a critical source of food and resources for Britain and its allies, leading to a ferocious drain of necessities from India that led to the Bengal famine in 1943 when 3 million Indians starved to death. When the matter was brought up, Winston Churchill replied, "I hate Indians, beastly people with a beastly religion. The famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits." India, the jewel of the British crown, served out its purpose, until Britain's departure in 1947.